Thank you so much for being here with us today. Welcome to the Brownfields Procurement for Tribal Communities. Know the rules and win the game webinar. I'm Jennifer Clancy. I'm with the Kansas State University Center for Hazardous Substance Research, and I'm the co-lead of the Tribal Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, along with my wonderful friend, Aral Salters. I'm also joined by a Tribal Tab partner and really close friend, Michelle Sponheimer from Adaapta. And we are thrilled to have all of you joining us today. And we really hope you're looking forward to this webinar as much as we are. We've been thinking about this one for a while. So hopefully it's great for you all too. With me. Okay, here we go. So I do have a few just like real quick little technical kind of housekeeping things we need to go through before we get started. So if you have any technical difficulties with your connection throughout, please call Hannah at 785-532-0783, or you can email chsr@ksu.edu, and Hannah or someone else should be able to help you out. We are recording this event today, and the recording, along with the presentation slides and any of the other resources that we share, they'll be available on the webpage where you registered for this event within the next few days. And the link for that is already shared in the chat, and we'll be sending up a follow-up email afterwards, so you'll have all this information. Okay. I think we're all pretty well versed in Zoom these days, but just a few little reminders just to make sure everyone has a really pleasant experience while we're here together today. So all the participants should be muted, but please just double check and make sure that your microphone is muted throughout the event. If you are using your phone for the audio, please make sure that your computer audio is muted in addition to your phone audio. This just reduces the chance of, static or feedback or anything like that for all of us. And also, please make sure that your video remains off during the presentation. And to make sure that we're able to verify your attendance, please change your participant name to match the name you used for registration. And so you can do this by clicking on the participants icon in the Zoom toolbar. And when the list of participants comes up, please find your name, click on the More button, and then select Rename. And then a new box is going to appear asking you to enter a new screen name. And so, yes, this is virtual. Yes, we told you keep your cameras off, keep yourself muted, all these things. But even within that space, we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So we encourage you to ask questions throughout the event today. We will sort of pause. There's some kind of built-in section breaks. We'll pause and take questions at that point, but we will have a dedicated, question and discussion time at the end today. So, you can ask your questions throughout or save them for the end. But yes, ask your questions in the Zoom chat feature. When we do get to the end and, we're the official question discussion time, we are most likely gonna unmute everyone and let you all, ask your own questions verbally if you choose. If things get a little bit chaotic and disorderly, we might mute everybody again and ask you to go back to the chat. But, again, we do want this to feel like a community and as interactive as possible. So please do use the chat, talk to your friends, and to help some of this feeling of community, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat and just like sharing your name and your organization. If you want to share anything beyond that, you can, but there's no expectations for as far as that is concerned. So the Tribal Technical Assistance to Brownfields program is one of the technical assistance to brownfields providers that's made possible through, this very generous funding through the EPA. And so Tribal Tab provides brownfields technical assistance to all federally recognized tribes, Alaskan Native villages, and other intertribal consortia. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Tribal Tab program, here's just a real quick kind of overview of who we are. Our mission is to support Indigenous communities in protecting and restoring sacred lands through the reuse, restoration, and redevelopment of brownfield sites. And the Tribal Tab is a collaborative partnership between Kansas State University, the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, or ITEP, and the Alaskan Native Tribal Health Consortium, or ANTHC. And you can see on the right side of the screen, there's a very general list of some of the ways that we may be able to assist you and your Brownfields program or your community. But we do always encourage people to reach out to us directly by emailing tribal-tab at ksu.edu. It's there on the screen. And let's just have a discussion about kind of where you are, what you're working on, what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, and then together we can create a path forward that will address your specific community needs, your goals, cultures, and traditions. And so, as you can see by that list on the right, there's a lot of stuff that Tribal Tab is able to do to assist you and your community and your Brownfields program. And so part of the way that we are able to provide support and assistance in so many areas of expertise on so many topics is that we have this really close and connected but very detailed supportive partner network. And that they have expertise in all these other different areas. So we're really fortunate to be able to work with people all over the country that bring in knowledge and expertise about all aspects of tribal brownfields and beyond. And so I'm really happy to be able to introduce one of those partners to you all today, Michelle Sponheimer, who I mentioned at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and turn everything over to Michelle. And I'll come back and visit you all at the end of this. Thanks.
Hey,
Michelle, it's up to you now.
awesome. Thanks, Jen. And thank you to Tribal Tab for, including us in this webinar. As Jen said, my name is Michelle Sponheimer, and I am the planning director with Adaapta. Adaapta's really fortunate and proud to be a Tab and Tribal Tab partner, and to be able to bring offerings like this to you. So, let's dig into procurement because I know it's a fun topic and everybody is super excited to talk about it. Um, it's one of those things, procurement, that, if you're a detail person, you can kind of get in the weeds and get to know all these little rules and things and recognize the importance of them for, really successfully administering the programs and things that you run. And so we're going to go through a lot of different pieces today. It's a lot of information. And I think one of the big takeaways that I hope you see is that and Jen and I were just talking about this. This is a resource for you, and Tribal Tab is a great resource to be able to, when you have those questions or things that come up, you know where you can go and get this information, that it's out there for you after today, and you can find the answers that you need. You don't have to memorize everything all at once because we don't do procurement every day. It's not something that we all do. Sometimes you do it once a year, and you're like, how did I do that? I don't remember. I mean, I go through it too. So what we're going to cover, we're going to touch on some procurement basics. We're going to talk about how it's regulated. We're going to talk about tribal sovereignty, the procurement life cycle, as I like to look at it, and then some common questions and pitfalls that people often have. And so let's start with some of the basics. So what is procurement? Some of you may be brand new to some of this type of work. And so we're going to try to touch on some basics for those more experienced in this arena. You might be, already well versed in this information, but in a nutshell, it's a process of obtaining goods, equipment, services from an outside source. It involves planning, solicitation, evaluation, contracting, and oversight. That's kind of that life cycle that I mentioned that we're going to talk about. And it is regulated by your tribal laws as well as federal requirements. And 2 CFR Part 200, they're quoted. All those green links as you get down to this later, those are going to be linked straight to the code for you for reference. And that's a big one. The 2 CFR Part 200 is a big one that we're going to go through. And procurement's a means for ensuring open and fair competition. And so that's really what is a big piece of all of our federal funding sources, not just through the EPA, but all federal funding sources want to ensure that that is something that we're doing when we're thinking about procurement. So when we think about why is it important, there are procurement benefits that benefit the tribe, they benefit potential vendors, community members, and our funders. And so some of those key things that we like to think about include fair competition, transparency. We all know transparency is a really big topic that you should be thinking about when you're working with federal funding. We want to maximize resources. We know resources are limited out there, and the further we can make them go, the more efficient we can use our funding, the better for everybody. And then the ability to build tribal capacity. So those are some of the things that we're going to explore a little bit more. So we'll start with fair competition. And when we think about fair competition, if you're a sports person, I'm not necessarily a sports person, so I don't really do a good job at those sports analogies, but you want to level the playing field, right? You want the clear process that ensures that all of your qualified vendors and contractors, whether they are tribal, native owned, non-native, have a fair shot at providing services and goods. It encourages quality. Fair competition pushes our vendors to think, what's the best proposal they can put forward to you, the best pricing, the best team or approach. So it encourages that to take that little bit extra step in thinking about what's the best thing to serve your needs. It often it helps us to avoid favoritism or future disputes. And by putting out transparent rules, you can prevent challenges or mistrust from community members or outside agencies. Again, being transparent is going to be a key piece when we talk about procurement throughout. And it provides project integrity. Fair competition reinforces accountability to tribal leadership, to the community, and again, to the funding agencies. Transparency, like I said, it's a big one. We want to make sure that we are always documenting our process, that clear documentation from the initial steps of developing your scope and your RFP to how you're going to evaluate vendors or contractors that are putting forward something to you, what decisions you make, how you come to those decisions. All of that information should be clearly documented and available to those that need to view it in accordance with your policies. And what it helps do is it protects the tribe in the event of audits. When you have grant compliance reviews, it allows you to know with confidence that you've done the process the best to your ability under the guidelines, and you can document your decision making. It ensures accountability to community members, to funders by having that transparent process. You can, again, demonstrate those decisions and how you made them and that they were made fairly, made consistently. We also look at why it's important is it maximizes our resources. Like I said, funding sources change, amounts available change. That's all things that we all see in an environment when we're thinking about federal funding or state funding or even local funding and how it's available and what's available. And so we want to use our dollars the most efficient way we can to maximize the benefits from them. And so when we do procurement properly, we can help stretch those dollars across those complex and multi-funded projects such as Brownfields. Better project outcomes can come from that. When we attract our vendors that have the right technical expertise, the cultural competency to deliver the high quality results that we're looking for, not just always going with the lowest bidder. There are times when the lowest bidder is appropriate, and then there are times when you use other criteria. And so, but we want to make sure that you're getting the right thing for what you're looking for and your needs. It allows you to leverage partnerships. A lot of the time, procurement can encourage things like matching contributions, joint ventures, maybe added community benefits that can expand on your project impact. And so those kind of things can be worked into just making your project and your resources go that much further and have that much greater impact. And again, that broad impact, a well-structured contract can align your project delivery with long-term community and redevelopment goals. A lot of the times when we think about projects like this, we got to think beyond the grant. That's a common theme with our federal funders is that they want to know sustainability and how you're going to keep things going. So keeping that in mind and building those relationships is really important. Another important piece is that it builds tribal capacity. And we look at opportunities for things like skills transfer, where contracts can even include expectations for maybe training or mentorship or collaboration that can help build internal expertise. And so that is something that you can, depending on what your project is looking for, there may be ways to incorporate into your process. You can work to grow your native owned businesses. Evaluation criteria and preferences can support those native owned firms and strengthen your tribal economies. There's institutional strengthening. As I mentioned, sometimes we only do procurement once every what feels like full moon, maybe, or once in a year. And so the more you do it, the more experience you get. Going through that process, documenting how you go through that process will help not only you the next time you have to do a procurement method, but it'll help other staff or new team members that are coming in to support your programs, and just really strengthening that institutional knowledge and how to do things appropriately. And finally, kind of the long-term resilience. If you have good, strong procurement practices, it will help build capacity that extends beyond those individual projects, supporting your future development efforts. You're setting the stage, you're setting a good foundation for how you want to interact with your contractors. So there's four key principles of cost allowability when we think about procurement. And these, again, these are across the board. Obviously, we're focusing on brownfields here under our tab program, but these are things that you will see if you work with any of the federal agencies, and that they're going to be concerned about what your costs, how you are making sure that those are appropriate. And so there's four kind of key principles that they look at and we think about. One is eligible. And that's it. Does the cost, are they allowed, are they permitted by the statute, the program guidance, or the regulations? Is it reasonable? Reasonable is, does it not exceed that would be incurred by a prudent person under circumstances prevailing at the time of the decision was made? So we are in very changing times, sometimes from day to day, between costs of materials or labor or other elements that are happening. And so we know that what was maybe reasonable 5 years ago would feel unreasonable, now. And so it's important to recognize those things. And again, kind of going back to documenting where those pieces change and why you consider something to be reasonable if there's something that's maybe questionable. It needs to be allocable. And that means that benefits the EPA funded projects or program costs are distributed in a reasonable proportion to the benefits that it's incurred specifically to carry out the project. So I know it's a lot. That's a big mouthful of stuff. Think about it in a sense, if you have a general staff person that maybe works on HR kind of things, and you're allocating a portion of their time to your program, you need to think about that is proportionately appropriate. Your program shouldn't pay for your full HR person, for example. They do a lot of other things. So recognizing where is the allocable pieces for what costs are being covered by the program. And again, this is across the board for all programs. So you always want to make sure, going back to that, it's eligible to even charge those kind of activities. And then finally, allowable. There are certain things that are just prohibited, to use federal funding or EPA funding on. Things like alcoholic beverages, interest on borrowed funds, lobbying, litigation. These are kind of should be the mostly obvious things, but it's important to make sure you recognize that, because the last thing you want is to have a problem where you've spent money on things you shouldn't. So the other piece we want to talk about kind of in this basics realm is the competition thresholds. And these do periodically change and did recently, not too long ago, do some increasing. And so the first kind of threshold that we think about is micro purchase, and that limit is 15,000. And those are purchases that are equitably distributed among suppliers to the extent practical. And these could be little things, like things that you might purchase with your purchase card, to keep your office, provide materials for outreach or certain things that you're doing. You always want to, again, make sure you're, supporting reasonable costs, and you're working within those thresholds. There are certain variances that you can have considered to increase that micro purchase threshold, and I've given you the link there to kind of look and see if those things might apply to your situation. The second method and threshold that we think about is the simplified acquisition threshold, and that has increased up to 350,000. And this allows for you to get prices or quotes from typically at least three qualified sources. Certainly can do more than that. But you'd like to get three to get a good representation. And so these might be things, that are a little more straightforward, that you're looking at, where you can just get a price estimate on something, and compare those as a process. Again, you want to really document that process that you went through, who you contacted, what those estimates were or quotes were, and who you selected and why. So document that information so that you have that available should you need to go through and explain those decision making. And then we get into formal competition, and this is the big one that I think most people kind of can be a little intimidating sometimes. And this is for your expenses that are over 350, where you must do the formal competition. However, what I would say is a lot of times you may have something that's in that smaller category that would qualify for simplified that you still want to do a formal competition for, and that's okay. And probably even encouraged at times. And so that doesn't restrict you from going for things that are less than 350, but at that point is where you have to do it. And there's different kinds of competition where you can do like a sealed bid or competitive proposals. And then the final one that I wanted to talk about is the non-competition or what's commonly called sole source. This is not as common, and we're going to talk about things a little bit more too, but it's not as common source of a method of procurement. There's only certain circumstances where you should be considering this. So what I often tell people is that, you may have a great company in your community and they are just awesome and wonderful and you love working with them. That doesn't justify a reason to just go straight to them to give a contract. So you still have to think about that open and fair competition. And if they're as great as they are, then they should be able to submit a fair and competitive application. So there are certain circumstances where it's appropriate, but it is rare. Okay, so those are some of the basics. Now we're going to get into some of the regulation. And again, this is a great nighttime reading for you if you're a code junkie. The Code of Federal Regulations, or the CFR, is what regulates so many of our federal guidelines for programs that we utilize. And what we have outlined here is just kind of some ways to think about how you use the code. And first step is identifying the relevant parts. So as I said, 2 CFR Part 200 is that uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, audit requirements. It's the basic high level applies across the board to so many federal programs. You got to understand that hierarchy of what is included in general provisions and what's maybe included in program specific requirements and how those play together. You can also look for examples and guidance. While the CFR sets out those very specific rules, there are oftentimes different guidance documents or program-specific FAQs that will provide examples or clarity about how to, in practice, put these pieces together. And we have some of those links here in a little bit too. And then you want to be able to cross-reference with those EPA policies and the different program guidance, the terms and conditions that are in your award, and also be thinking about your tribal-specific procurement policies that you may have in place so that all those things kind of work together to ensure that you are compliant with the procurement policies. And use the CFR to support your documentation. Citing specific sections can help you demonstrate that your purchases were allowable, allocable, eligible, reasonable, and that you followed those rules. And so utilize that when you're making your decisions, when you are referencing things and documenting your process. So again, all these little green ones should be hyperlinked when you are able to view those slides later on to give you some guidance. Again, our general, what we talked about, that 2 CFR Part 200, that's going to include the majority of things that we talk about today. There is a section, Part 1500, which includes some EPA implementation, references, and specific policies. Another one that we commonly think about when we're talking about procurement is 40 CFR Part 33. And this has to do with disadvantaged businesses, or DBE, and women uh, business enterprises as well. Kind of the meeby weeby, those kind of whole thing that we talked about. And following those as may be required in your contracts. Again, it's important to recognize what's current, what applies to you in doing those procurement policies. General rule of thumb, good practice is that in order to ensure everybody has an open and fair chance for things, including our DBEs, that a period for bidding is open for at least 30 days. And so that's a good one to remember. And that's just good. Nobody wants to turn around and get something to you within a week. You want to make sure you're giving time for your vendors to give you the best possible proposal. So 30 days is a really good rule of thumb. You also want to keep yourself up to date on policy and guidance, document changes, different orders. There's recipient applicant information notices, RAIN, and the terms and conditions, again, that are in your specific agreements or things that might change. Typically, project officers are fantastic at sending out alerts when these kind of things come up and to let you know that, oh, something has changed. It may affect you. Please, read a notice. If you have questions, reach out and contact the EPA and your project officer to make sure that you're following everything that you need to. You can also go and check out some of those notices and kind of things on your own just periodically to make sure, oh, did something else new come out that I might have missed? And then there's a lot of great resources available through the EPA, through Tribal Tab, and all our tabs across the country have so many great resources available in different forms. And so here's just one about Brownfields grants specifically and a guidance to competitively procuring a contractor. So when I think about the tribal procurement policies and kind of how those are affected, there are specific sections that dive into that aspect as well. And so again, it's under that 2 CFR 200 .317, where procurement by state and Indian tribes when using the federal funds, that they must follow your own written procurement policies and procedures when they exist and apply them consistently to both federal and non-federal funds. If no such policies exist at the time of the award, you want to follow the general standards. And so if you intend on having specific procurement policies that are unique to your tribe, you want to make sure that you have those in place prior to those awards being made for funding. And that just ensures that you're using them all the time, that it's being applied across the board, and that it's there and ready to go when you get the announcement letter that says, congrats, you have funding. So get those kind of things in order when you're in the process of thinking about it. And then there's some other ones that we noted here as well, just about contracting with certain types of enterprises, different promoting U.S. goods and materials and recovered materials and contracts. So just, again, some other key things that we wanted to make sure that you had for reference. So as we talk about procurement and tribal sovereignty and thinking about the impacts there, we think about one of the key pieces of protecting tribal interests. So strong tribal procurement policies can not only ensure your federal compliance, but you want to do that while protecting your sovereignty. So outside agencies and contractors to ensure that they are respecting tribal law, traditions, and your decision-making process. Your procurement choices and local policies can be used to safeguard the cultural resources, your natural resources, and your community health. By providing transparent and well-structured procurement, that helps prevent any exploitation or contracts that don't serve your long-term community goals. So this is important for tribal communities. It's important for all communities to understand what it is your community is looking for and the needs that will best fit the opportunities that tribal communities have to incorporate that into the procurement process is really important that you're able to do that if you so desire to make sure that you're protecting key pieces that are important to your community. It also has the opportunity to build, as we talked about a little bit earlier, the economic empowerment and nation building. Procurement can be a driver for economic development, prioritizing your native-owned contractors and firms, creating opportunities for workforce development, building your tribal capacity to manage future projects independently. And this all ties redevelopment directly to community wealth building instead of outside profit. So it's important to think about how those pieces can all tie together to help build your community and do that within that process of procurement. And it allows us for reinforcing self-determination. Tribes, as I said, can design your procurement policies to reflect these unique priorities rather than just defaulting to the outside templates. Um, it's important that you set that evaluation criteria and that you tribes determine who does that work and how it's done, that's all very clearly outlined, as we said, as part of your policies that you would adopt. The individual tribe procurement policies must be approved prior to that award of funding. So again, that's a key piece. And I think it's incorporated, a lot of times we'll see very similar things across the board between maybe your own procurement policies will reflect very similar to a lot of the federal regulations and stuff, but it's just that added piece of certain things that you might want to include. All right, so we're going to get into the procurement life cycle. And the way that I look at procurement, I look at it as kind of a 5-step approach that you start with your planning and then go on to solicitation, evaluation, contracting, and oversight. And we're going to go into each one of these a little bit further. So planning, defining your scope. Why does this import? Why does it matter? What's important about it? So your scope drives everything. If you are too vague with what you're looking for, then your costs can end up kind of ballooning. You don't really get what you were hoping for. Kind of on the flip side, if you're too rigid, you may miss out on some opportunities that a contractor or vendor could bring forward to you that might really fit your project. From the Brownfields angle, our scope can be a very highly technical, where you need phase 1 or phase 2 environmental site assessments completed. Maybe you're looking for remediation or demolition, reuse planning, very key, specific items. Other brownfield scope items may include grant management, community engagement, or other specific related activities. Again, provided they meet all those core principles of eligible and allowable. The tribal sovereignty connection, the tribes determine what is included in that scope beyond those federal minimum requirements, ensuring that the work reflects your tribal priorities, your values, and your long-term community goals. So again, keeping all that information in that planning stage of knowing what's important to include and what's going to be important for your community and great success, going through that process as the planning stage is really critical. The second step in the life cycle is solicitation, and that's when you're preparing and issuing that request. And why this matter, this step takes your scope, your planning that you've been doing, and puts it into the formal process that you're going to go and request vendors to respond to. And the solicitation method depends on the type of work that you want and how you're going to structure that competition. So again, are you be able to just go into your quotes? Are you doing competitive competition? What is it that you're looking for? And what does that work include? From a brownfields perspective, your brownfield project may require solicitation of a contractor to perform cleanup or of a site or consulting firm to conduct community engagement. Understanding the type of work that's needed will also help guide what you're going to put in that request because you might want specific skills or licensing or experience to come through that shows that they're able to perform that work. From a tribal sovereignty connection, we want to make sure that we're incorporating the specific attributes that encourage your tribal businesses or experience working with the tribe and understanding what are the different things that are unique to your organization and your community that are important for somebody who's going to be working with you. You think about how are you engaging with the community, for example, and does the consultant understand those needs and able to work with you? Some other important considerations to think about when you're putting together those documents is that, when you include criteria that reflect the tribal priorities, such as your native-owned firm preferences, local hiring, or cultural competency, include that criteria. When you're posting solicitations, you can do that on your website, online posting, bid services that are out there that you can use. Oftentimes they're free for, agencies who are posting. Um, look, work with your local media outlets, do email blasts. You can do direct communication to those vendors. It is important that you send it to multiple and you don't just single out. Again, you don't want to have any unfair competitive advantage for somebody. There are some key specific things that are really good to include in your solicitations. And again, this goes towards kind of clarity and transparency about understanding the different schedule and time frame. And so there's certain dates that you would want to include that are important for your contractors to know about. You want to define what's acceptable forms of communication for questions so that they don't just start calling anybody who's around to ask questions. Is it everything goes by email? You have, again, document and transparency of that process. Define your evaluation criteria and your scoring method. Make that clear so that potential respondents know how they're going to be evaluated, and that too, you can demonstrate that and track that for clarity and transparency later on. And keep your solicitation open for at least 30 days, as we talked about earlier. So when it comes to evaluation, the criteria review and selection, this is a process. You score your proposals, usually based on that criteria that you've set forth in your solicitation. They may be based on technical expertise, cost, past performance, cultural competency. These are all kind of things that, depending on what your scope was asking for, then you would want your scoring to reflect those things that you're needing. Certain tools you can use. You can use a scoring matrix to document your decisions. That protects the fairness and transparency. And then if you're using a panel, a selection team to review things, everybody is operating under the same expectations of what qualifies for certain priorities or point values within that scoring. So from a brownfields perspective, sometimes the lowest bidder, like I said, isn't always the most advantageous to your program. It depends on the scope and what you're looking for. So contractor experience and past performance related to program compliance or engagement can impact that selection. From a tribal perspective, evaluation criteria can also reflect those community values like we've discussed. And on a very basic level, contractor eligibility, it is critical to ensure that your contractor is not suspended or debarred. And those are things that you can look up through the federal sites to see if they're in good standing through SAM.gov. And then, so you've gone out, you thought about what you wanted, you put your request, your solicitation out there, you've evaluated everybody, you've picked your contractor that you're going to be working with, and now you need to formalize your terms. So now you're at that contracting stage. And when we think about procurement, we often think about all that first stuff, and we don't think about sometimes that it really does continue on through the life of working with that contractor. And so formalizing your terms, this is really critical to make sure that you have a successful relationship with your contractor throughout the duration of that term. Contracts should be clearly defined, the deliverables that are expected, the timelines, the payment terms, compliance requirements, and reasons for termination. We all hope that we never have to deal with those kind of pieces, but sometimes, unfortunately, we do. And so it's important that you outline those things in the beginning so that everybody clearly understands what the expectation is and what a failure to meet those will result in. From a Brownfields perspective, ensure that your contracts reference the federal requirements, tie to your funding, reference the different program requirements, and that everything is aligned. And from a tribal perspective, include clauses that may protect the tribal resources, confidentiality, dispute resolution under your tribal law, or cultural heritage safeguards. So then finally, again, we're not done until we get all the way through. And there's oversight and compliance and ongoing monitoring throughout that duration of that contract. And so it doesn't end with a contract is signed or once you've just, selected a contractor. You need to make sure that the contractor is performing as promised, following those rules that you've outlined throughout that process. Certain brownfield compliance issues, and some of these apply even beyond brownfields, and are definitely program specific, but you may have to have things like Davis-Bacon Act may apply, Build America, Buy America may apply, other environmental safety standards, depending on what the scope of work included. From a tribal role, oversight is a chance to monitor the quality, enforce your cultural protections, and build your staff knowledge by working alongside those contractors or becoming familiar with what the expectations are. All right, we're covering a lot, and I know it's a lot. And so we're going to hit a couple more items here, just kind of some common items, questions, pitfalls, and that you can just be thinking about that sometimes catches up. So one of the things is conflict of interest. Conflict of interest is a big one that, especially in our smaller communities, I think can feel a little overwhelming. The very basic, no employee or officer or agent should participate in the selection or the award or administration of the contract if they have a real or apparent conflict of interest. And the real or apparent, this is the part that sometimes catches people up. Real, I feel, is the easy part. You own a company, you can't bid on it and select yourself, right? I mean, these are kind of the obvious things that we all, I think, understand. You have a financial benefit from that. A parent gets a little bit more gray and sometimes harder to distinguish as to what that exactly is, especially like I said, when we're in small communities and all the same five people are on everything. We know that there's a lot of interaction in small communities. And so how I often look at this and when we talk to communities about it is understanding the transparency component of this and being very clear about where interests may be, what relationships are, how that impacts the decision making, documenting those pieces so that should there be a question, somebody could say, I recuse myself from a decision making process, or at least all of these things have been publicly displayed, if you will, and made clear as to what potential conflicts may exist and how you can move forward. So it's just an important conversation to have with those that are involved with the selection process, with the decision-making process, to ensure that you don't have any conflicts that could cause a problem down the road. We've talked a little bit about this throughout, but the avoiding unfair competitive advantages. You want to make sure that you're having this fair competition, right? Open and fair competition. And if you are using templates that are provided by a contractor, that gives them an unfair competitive advantage because they're going to know what you're looking for. They're going to know how format you're going to use or how that's coming out. And so it's very important to not use materials that are drafted by some of those firms. There's a lot of great resources through the tab providers in helping with those things. If you have questions, working with other communities that you have formed relationships with, are great ways to kind of branch out and see what you can use. But you want to be very cautious, when you're thinking about like not giving somebody the potential for an unfair competitive advantage. So using sample language or documents that they've prepared for you. Um, you don't want to impose unreasonable competition requirements that would overly narrow and create a situation where only one firm can meet them. There are times when you put out a full competitive solicitation and you may only get one response, but you have done all the effort and documented all the things that you've done to get multiple responses. But again, sometimes in small communities, that just may not be possible. But you don't want to restrict your language such that nobody else would be able to apply. And you don't want to discourage other contractors from submitting an offer by naming firms. Don't want to say, oh, firm X, they're great. We love them. And they're going to do an awesome job. And then your firm Y is like, oh, I'm not even going to try because they already have a relationship there. So it's really important to make sure that you're keeping that open and encouraging, anybody who's interested to participate. And finally, kind of there, that open, transparent communication. It's an opportunity for questions to be answered during the procurement process. Do those in a space where anybody who potentially is thinking about responding has opportunity to get those questions. So a common approach is to say questions can be emailed to me by this date. I will post all the questions received and responses to all those questions for everybody to see on our website or so on, rather than responding just to a contractor who might call you or email you directly and just want an answer. You want to make sure everybody has all the same information. And so that's a really important piece in the transparency and making sure everybody has access. Another thing is like cost reasonableness. Sometimes can be one of those more things where we get hung up a little bit when we're trying to evaluate pricing evaluations. So evaluating your cost proposals alongside your other evaluation criteria is important. Evaluating your top two scoring cost proposals. You can kind of see where things might separate. Cost proposals might be submitted separate from the rest of the proposal sometimes. So if you're evaluating experience and expertise and different things, you definitely want cost still to be incorporated in that. And in your scoring criteria, you should always include the cost component to the overall scoring. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take the lowest in certain situations. But it is important to consider it. And then document your decision-making process. I've said this multiple times, I know, right? Document. The lowest price doesn't always have to be selected, but you need to understand why it is you're selecting what. So utilizing your scoring rubric, keeping those score sheets for your record according to your record retention policies. It's often recommended to keep, maybe your top 3 or 5, whatever your policy might state, responses, maybe even all of them, for period of time, duration of contract, certainly, probably your grant period. So just documenting all those kind of things so that you have all the information you need when it comes to time for an audit, when your project officer says, hey, I need to see how you did this process. Or a potential somebody who didn't get selected says, I want to see what you did and why you made these decisions. So it's important to just document all those things, maintain your records in accordance with all of your policies so that you can always come back to them and explain the decisions that you made. And I think I got through everything. Um, and so I think we still have some time for questions even. And
Awesome.
Jen,
Awesome,
were we
Michelle.
right?
Yes, we have some
So,
time for questions. So,
yay.
um, before we have one question so far that's coming through the chat. So before we get to that, I do want to, um, encourage you to scan the QR code that's on the screen or, follow the link that was just put in the chat for an evaluation of this event. It's really, really helpful and important to us that we, are able to get feedback from you. It helps us understand, what was really helpful to you and how we can continue to offer additional beneficial programming for all of you. Also, it helps demonstrate to EPA that they should continue to fund the tab and the tribal tab program. So if you don't mind, take a few minutes while we're chatting. Um, also, um, so Michelle covered a lot of stuff today, and it's not necessarily like the lightest, fluffiest material ever, right? So, as we mentioned at the beginning, the slides and the recording of this are going to be available on the event webpage so you can go back and kind of revisit things. But additionally, we would like to share with all of you that we have taken this opportunity to put together a tribal procurement guide. And so, Hannah just put that link in the chat. That'll take you directly to the new guide. It's hot off the presses, just got finished about a week ago. This can be found on the tools, guides, and templates resource section of the Tribal Tab website, which Hannah shared that link in the chat for you too. So, okay, now questions. We did get one that came in through the chat, Michelle, and it was from about 15 minutes ago. So I don't remember exactly where you were in the presentation at that point, but the question is, does 51% native-owned business have to go through three bids?
Yeah, I think, and I'm kind of pulling up to it. It looks like somebody chimed in, so appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's general rule of thumb, and I'm not going to say that I 100% know that there might not be an exception to this. But I would say that I agree with the comment that a good rule of thumb is to always try to get your three bids. And, establishing your opportunity for preferences for native owned business or some of those different kind of pieces is a way to help determine who might be the best fit when you do have some, but you wouldn't want to eliminate the option of having multiple opportunities come forward. That would be my response to that. Like I said, I'm not saying 100% that there's not something out there that says it different, but that would be my thoughts. You always want to give yourself opportunity to collect all the potential that's out there.
Okay. Um, we can unmute if people have other questions, and you can't get all crazy and unruly. If it gets wild in here, we'll mute everybody again. But I know sometimes it can be easier to communicate verbally than it can putting all your thoughts into the chat. So we will unmute you all to take the next few minutes and answer questions. If you still have any or any just kind of general discussion about the procurement topic. Um, so Hannah, people should be able to unmute themselves now. Okay, yes. You can unmute your camera or unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you'd like. And while I'm waiting for all of you to ask all of your questions and have a discussion, I also do want to share that Michelle is going to be joining us during our next Tribal Brownfields Knowledge Circle chat. That will be on June 18th. So we can continue that conversation and really dig deeper into stuff after, you've had to, if you're like me, I have to process stuff for a while before I have questions. So, Michelle's gonna still be, she's always available. We'll share her contact information. I can share it. It's on the next slide. But also just so you all know that if you come into the next Knowledge Circle chat on June 18th. Michelle's going to be there so we can continue this conversation. And I'll send the invitation out for that around the first of the month, like I usually do. So if you don't have it yet, that's why, but it'll be coming to you. So, questions, comments? Are your brains exploding? That was
You
so
just
much
answered
information,
everything, right?
Michelle, but so good. It was so good. I've been in this a long time and I'm still learning. You have
Oh,
to hear things
100%.
so many times, before
I
it's
think
just
that
stuck in your brain, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good like kind of thing to take away, right? Is we are always learning. Even I mean, I was learning as I was putting together this presentation. I was like, oh, yeah, wait, no, this updated. I need to make sure I include this information. So, yes, things are changing. We're always learning, and it's okay to forget it for a while and then go back to it and go like, oh, okay, I know I need to know something about that, and I can go to Tribal Tab and figure it out, right?
That's right. That's right. You can. And if we don't know the answer, we will find the answer for you. We did get a question. What are some places to post the RFP for 30 days? Which is an excellent
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So I always say for sure start with your own individual like website, things like that that you use. Because you want to make sure you have it there that you can direct, potential vendors to. Because that just drives them back to your program, which is always important. But use your local sources. Some programs may have newspapers that have different regional distribution, but there's also online outlets. I think it's what is it like Midnet, I think is one. And there are a couple different sources, and some of them, a lot of the times, they may be free to you as the poster, because they may have a cost for the vendors who are looking to um, you know respond. So there's sources that way. Sometimes also through different organizations like associations and things like that. Sometimes may have postings as well. So if you're a member of, maybe like a planning association or a whatever kind of other professional organizations, if it relates to that, sometimes they have postings as well looking for vendors. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, a lot of ways to do it free, to get that out there.
Thanks, Michelle. Aaron, hello, friend.
Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much. I just wanted to say that the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium contract team can post RFPs for any of the tribes in Alaska. So happy to do that for um, no charge there. I will put my email in the chat, and if you do have an RFP that you want posted, just email me and I can connect you to our contract folks.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Aaron. Um, Another question in the chat. Are there any common areas or topics to double check for potential audits?
Mm. I think, I think the biggest thing in preparing for audits is really just having yourself well documented and keeping a record of all of the process. Keep a copy of the solicitation that you put out, keep a copy of, if you post it on a website, for example, do a little screenshot and show that you posted it. Keep a clipping of the newspaper ad. Document the list of everybody who responded. And if you do like a sealed bid with envelopes, keep the copy of the envelope or scan it, so it shows like the date time stamp that you received it to show that it came in on time. These are little things that you can do to really just cover all of the bases. So if there's a question, because that's really what a lot of it comes up to make sure that you follow the rules. And especially if somebody were to challenge that, maybe you chose somebody, you didn't give somebody else a fair shot at something, you have the ability then to say, nope, we followed our process, we followed our policies. I have all my documentation. It's all saved nicely, neatly in this folder or in this electronic drive. To just show whenever there's a discrepancy of something, you have it there. And we forget. That's, I think, probably the biggest part is you go through a process and your audit comes a year later or year and a half or whatever, you're reviewing files and you're like, I don't remember what I did a year ago. So it allows you to look back on it and reflect and know that you did the steps right. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits about it is because we just forget. I can't remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what I did a year ago when an auditor asks. So documenting those kind of things is key in helping to, you know, think about your future self and reducing the stress of your future self.
And not just your future self, but maybe you win the lottery and you leave your
Right.
job. Think about whoever's going to be in your role in the future. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So, two other questions have come in. More questions have it. This is awesome, y'all.
Mhm.
We'll stick around as long as you all keep having questions. And, again, Michelle will be at the Knowledge Circle chat so we can continue this conversation then. So, Michelle, what is the difference between an RFP and an RFQ?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, so technically, request for proposal, request for qualifications, right? That's the technical. Oftentimes you may see them interchangeable, and I'll say that because um, a lot of times we think about proposals typically a little more defined, a little maybe clear cut as to what's being requested, maybe a specific um, task or cost associated that's more easier to find. I need 10 phase twos, right? Or something like that, right? It's a little more defined. Where qualifications, you might be looking a little bit more at the expertise and experience, past um, examples of things, or maybe a certain skill set in terms of, especially like around community engagement or things like that. So when we think about proposals and qualifications, that's some of the pieces, but I'll be real honest. A lot of the times you see them interchanged. And I have not experienced a situation where if like you use one instead of the other, it's going to like throw out your responses. So don't dwell on it. It's my opinion. It's I think, like I said, I see it commonly used in both ways, and I don't think either one is going to completely throw you out of the water if you make that error. That's not the deal killer, in my opinion. That's my own personal opinion. Somebody can alter otherwise, but that's been my
Yeah.
response.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. What if you are having issues with the contractor not keeping up with the timeline and schedule of contact? What about disciplinary actions?
Oh, great question. And that's where, I mentioned earlier when we were talking like the importance of including your terms and conditions and having outlined within that what are the reasons for termination, for discipline. Um, Getting your contract, making sure that that's clear and understood. There are a lot of different ways to deal with that. You can, depending on, and it depends on what the contract terms are. If they're not meeting a deadline, there might be essentially kind of a warning, of, hey, you've promised to meet this by this deadline, you haven't done it. How are we going to rectify the situation and make sure we get back on track? To the really harsh pieces of like, I got to terminate your contract. And that's when you want the protections in there that outline when you can terminate a contract, under what reasons, what that process looks like. Highly encourage you to involve your legal counsel in those processes and determining your terms and conditions up front, to make sure that what you are saying you could do in certain situations, you legally have the authority to do. So contract review and legal counsel support is really, really important, because nobody wants to go to court. It's not fun. And so try to avoid that at all costs. But by doing that, you do that by really detailed, clearly outlining your terms.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. We have one more question in the chat, and then probably we'll close it up at that point. But as a reminder, our contact information is here on the screen. Send us questions anytime. And again, the Knowledge Circle chat, we can keep this conversation going on June 18th. So if you post with the RFP that the bids will be opened publicly at a set location and time, and none of the contractors show up, but one is wanting to see the bids after selection of the contractor, can you show them, or did they have to be at that meeting?
Yeah, that's a good one. So again, I would, think about what your policies are. First of all, kind of go back to how that's outlined. Um, common common practice a lot of the time is to have a bid result um summary, if you will, of what, and it could be a simple like table that says, these contractors submitted a bid. If it's a price point kind of comparison, then it might be like, here's what they bid, or just maybe that they submitted, depending on what, how your proposal are. And so that summary, it's great to post that in those same locations that you post the proposal. And some of those like online resources actually have processes where you can do that, where you can actually say, here's the award information. That's also a nice thing to take to, tribal council for approval. It's like, here's the 5 people that responded, and here's who we selected, here was their scoring. Um, if they want to see the full proposals, often that's done through like a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request, where somebody actually submits and says, I want to see like the full proposal, not just that scoring summary. So that you don't have to release all that to everybody without having a process of a formal request. But a summary is always helpful. And that way people know like how many people bid, where did I fall in it? That's a good way to kind of handle that situation. And yes, I would have supplied it to anybody who you would normally supply it to, and that way posting it on the website makes it the easiest because you can just direct everybody there.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. We're gonna go ahead and close up. Those of you that stuck with us, awesome. Thank you. Don't forget to, excuse me, don't forget to complete your evaluation. Please, please, please. Very, very helpful for us. Um, you will be getting a follow-up email after this, and so it'll have again the, link back to the event page where the recording and the resources are. Maybe I don't know exactly what all is going to be. It might include the link directly back to the procurement guide. Hannah and I will figure this out. But it will also include the link to the evaluation. It'll take you 4 minutes to complete this. So please. And one final time, our contact information. And thank you so much for being here, and hope that this was really helpful. It's not my favorite topic, if I'm gonna be honest. It's not my favorite topic, but it is so, so, so important. And Michelle is just kind of a champ at this, and so we're really fortunate and lucky to be able to have access to her and all of her knowledge. And so we're here. Tribal Tab is here to help you out as you're putting um, RFPs or RFQs, whichever you choose to call it. As you're going out, as you're working through your procurement process, we are here to help you in whatever way we can. And we look forward to seeing you the next time we see you. So have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.